When I first launched my company, I didn't really have a lifestyle. My life was pretty much 100%, work, work, work. There were a lot of things that I wish I knew, but the big one is that you cannot build a brand alone. Welcome to Maker's Mindset. I'm your host, Nancy Twine. And for the finale of season 3, we're going to do things a bit differently. So instead of our usual guest conversations, I'm going to be answering questions that you, our community, have submitted about business, life, and everything in between. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder of Briogeo, which is the clean, high-performance hair care brand. And back in 2013, I pivoted from my corporate finance job to start my company. And I was the then youngest Black founder CEO to launch a product line at Sephora. And during my journey, I bootstrapped my business for many years. I raised over 20 million of private equity, and I ultimately sold my company for 9 figures. And now I'm so excited to be sharing some of my insights with you on this special solo episode. So let's go ahead and jump into your questions. Okay, so the first question is, I have a first of its kind product. How do I get the word out without a big budget? Really great question. First of a kind product. I'm really interested. I think that is a big sort of clue that you have something innovative. And if you have something that's first of its kind, it's a true innovation. I think the best thing that you can do is some do-it-yourself press. What I would do is I would put together like a one-pager of what the innovation is, how it works, what makes it different, all the bells and whistles. And I would start reaching out to editors that, feel aligned with the types of publications that you'd want to be in. So for example, maybe it's Forbes, maybe it's Entrepreneur, or maybe if it's a food product, maybe it's a food publication. And one way that you can actually do that is read some of the articles that you would dream of being in and look at the editor who actually wrote the article. And oftentimes you can get their name and then you can derive their Instagram handle, for example. And I would just shoot them a cold DM. But I think do-it-yourself press is one of the best ways to start getting some buzz going and driving people to your product without, spending tons of money. And then if you actually have the product and it's actually manufactured, you may also want to think about seeding that with some influencers that would be, appropriate for that type of product. But obviously I don't know too much about what the product is, so I can't give super specific advice. But I will say as a general rule of thumb, do-it-yourself press and influencer seeding are typically pretty cost-effective ways to market your product. All right, question number 2. If you had to start over from zero in this economy, what are the top 3 things that you do differently or exactly the same? So I'm assuming this means like starting over with my business. So we're just going to assume that. I think number 1, as a founder, I would have had, a social media presence from the start. When I started my brand Briogeo, I guess 12 years ago now, I didn't even have an Instagram. And I think now, because so many categories are so saturated, you have to pull all the levers to really stand out and tell your story. So that's number 1. I would be investing in my personal brand from day one. Something that I would do the same, and this is something that I am very passionate about, and something that I think we did really well with Briogeo is we were constantly focused on innovation. We didn't just launch a product line and then, say, hey, this is us and stay the same. Like we were constantly evolving, pushing the boundaries on innovation, creating things that didn't exist. So that's something that I would have continued to do. And I think the last thing that I would have done differently, and this goes back to social media, because I just feel like it drives so much brand awareness, buzz, amplification. I would have probably, maybe one of my first early hires would have been a social media manager. We just didn't have enough people really focused on it to take advantage of it to the extent that I think you need to do today. So again, this is all in the context of me, launching my brand all over again in today's world. Those are the 3 things that I would do. All right, question 3. What small early decision had the biggest long-term impact on your brand's growth and community? I mean, I guess it wasn't really a small decision. It was a big decision. It was a transformative decision. It was actually selecting Sephora as my exclusive retail partner. I really feel like they are the best of the best in the beauty industry. And not only did they help me sell products, they did so much to help me think differently about how I was cultivating my brand, how I was thinking about innovation. And it was just such a powerful partnership. It still is. And, partnering with them is been so impactful to my journey. And then also just, my learning about this industry. I've learned so much from the people that I've worked with at Sephora that have really helped to take Briogeo to where it is today. All right, question number 4. How can I make my first sale before I have inventory in hand. Well, this can be done. And I think really the best way to do it is to make sure you have a website, but also make sure that you have some sort of landing page for the product where people can pre-order or do a wait list. I think pre-order is probably the most common way, but you've got to get people to actually pre-order, right? So if you have some sort of prototype or, any way that you can start talking about the product on social media to start building that buzz and getting people excited about it, I think if you pair that with having the pre-order option on your website, it's a great way to get those early sales. I've also seen on platforms like Kickstarter, people do exactly that. They have a ton of information about what it is they're going to launch. They have prototypes, images, even sometimes videos, but it's enough to get someone interested and compelled that they're going to pay for it up front, even though you may not ship it for another couple of months. So that's how I would go about that. All right, question 6. What is the best way to track business performance when you're early and you don't have a full team? Well, I am a big believer in metrics. I think you have to measure what matters, because if you're not measuring it, it's really hard to figure out, should I keep doing the same thing or do I need to pivot? And I think just some of the basics, like fundamentally, if you have a business and you are starting out, you should obviously be tracking your sales, where they're coming from, how they're changing on a month-to-month basis. In addition, profitability, right? So you're taking in revenue, but how much are you putting out so that you can understand like, hey, is what I'm doing actually profitable? And if it's not, that's okay, because most brands starting out aren't profitable, but really understanding sort of what your path is going to be to get there. And then there are a lot of other metrics that you can track as well. I think repeat order rate is really important. So how many customers are coming, back to your site and actually reordering. That can be a really good sign, especially if you want to start pitching retailers at some point in the future. I think if you're working with influencers, there's a metric called EMV, which is earned media value, so that you can just get at least a rough sense of how those impressions are sort of translating into media value for your business. And I would also say too, it's less of a metric per se, but you really want to understand your reviews. What are people saying about your product on the internet? And be open to the great reviews, obviously, but also the constructive reviews, because oftentimes there's a lot of insight in the constructive reviews that can help you to improve your product or even launch something really spectacular in the future. All right, question 7. I love watching your lifestyle. How did you get there? And what choices helped shape it? I think for me, my lifestyle has changed over the years. I know when I first launched my company, I didn't really have a lifestyle. My life was pretty much 100%, work. And I think as I started to grow the business, I obviously started bringing in team members. So it wasn't just me doing everything anymore, because that, also was not sustainable. And I think that as I started to bring in more people who knew more than me in certain areas, and as the company just got bigger, I was not needed in the same way. And so that just gave me the ability to start creating a bit more balance in my life. I don't think it's possible to get to 100% balance, but at least it gave me more time back to do some of the things that, I really love to do, whether it's spending time with friends, going out to eat, taking some vacations. I'm really into fashion. I love going to fashion shows and just seeing sort of the newest designs out there. I feel like I finally have some time to do some of those things. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to priorities, because there's a lot of things that I don't do too. And typically the things that I don't do are things that just don't fall on my priority list. And so I think it's really important to understand what matters to you, so that when you do get to a point where you have some time, you can do more of those things and less of the things that either you don't love to do or that simply aren't a priority. Question 8, tell us about your dating journey and what you've learned as a successful woman navigating love in a partnership. So several months back, I actually did like a little Instagram reel about this, but I am engaged. I met my partner a few years ago. He's amazing. And I would say that as a general rule of thumb, I think, as women, if we are, trying to create the life that we want to create, it requires a lot of ambition. It requires a lot of sacrifice, especially if you're running a business. And it can be really hard, especially in the beginning when you're doing everything, to devote time to dating. And I think that that's totally normal. And you shouldn't, pressure yourself to do so. I think it comes back to priorities. And I think things do evolve over time. I think if you're at a point where, maybe you are putting 100% into your company and you need to be doing that right now, but also finding your person is also a priority. You've just got to figure out how to dedicate some time to dating, right? Even if it means going on a date, once a month or only on the weekends, you have to just figure it out like you do everything else. Like, if going to the dentist or, getting your groceries, these are things that you find time to do. You have to find time in your schedule to focus on dating as well, if it's a priority. And, I think, again, it's a very sort of, personal thing, but I have a lot of friends who are dating, who are married, who have kids that are building incredible careers for themselves. And it's because they know what's important to them. And that's where they focus their time and energy. All right. Question number 9. What do you now know about building a brand that you wish you'd known when you were starting? So I think for me, there were a lot of things that I wish I knew, but the big one is that you cannot build a brand alone. And in the beginning, you're obviously going to be doing everything yourself because you have no choice. But that pivot point to when you need people, whether it's an agency, an intern, a freelancer, a consultant, that pivot point comes really, really quickly. And I think it's really important to make sure that especially when you're bringing people into your organization, part-time, full-time hires, that you're not just hiring for resume, someone's skill set, but that you're also hiring for values. And this is why, I tell founders who are starting their businesses, don't just have your business plan, but also figure out what is important to you as it relates to creating the culture of your company and define those as your values. And when you start hiring people, make sure they're a fit for that, because you may find some people that, check all the boxes from a resume perspective. But if they don't have the shared values that you have for your company, it can end up, being, a really not good situation by having that person in the company. And it can also impact the other people there as well. So I think that's the biggest thing is don't just hire for a resume, hire for values and make sure that they're a fit and they're going to be someone who is a culture carrier and not someone who detracts from it. All right, question 10. This is the last question. I can't believe we're almost done. Question is, what's one mindset shift that changed everything for you? I think for me, it's really been knowing that to get to the place that you want to get to, you have to deal with hard. And some days I wake up and I'm like, what's going to be my hard today? All right, I'm going to the gym at 6 a.m. That's going to be my hard. But I know that if I do that consistently, I'm going to achieve my fitness goals. Or, my hard today is literally going to be sitting in front of my computer for 2 hours and literally just focusing on writing this article because I get distracted sometimes. It's hard for me to just sit for 2 hours and just do one thing. That's hard for me. But I know that if I do the hard, I'm going to get the output that I want. And so I think for me, the mindset shift is not looking at hard as something that I want to avoid or procrastinate about or put to the side. It's like, no, hard is going to get me to where I want to be. So let me do more of the hard things. And I think that's been really transformative. So that's all the questions we have time for today. And I want to thank you all for joining me for this special AMA episode and for being a part of our journey throughout season 3 of Maker's Mindset. Stay tuned for season 4 as we continue to bring you more inspiring stories from female founders, leaders, and change makers. To stay connected with the Maker's Mindset community and me, check out all of the details in the episode description below. And don't forget to subscribe to this series, leave a review, and share this episode with your community. Thanks so much for tuning in.